team. Jason, obviously, as your lead. We also have Christina, Kimberly, and myself, Kristen. So we are here today as a resource, as a guide, and we are incredibly excited to just better get to know you and to dive into this content with you. You'll see some resources. I think, Jason, you dropped the slides in the chat. We'll do that again right now. The workbook. So we heard loud and clear last time that the workbook, you need a little more structure and guidance for how to utilize that throughout the session. So this time around, we'll have some clearer cues for when and how to utilize that. We're excited to integrate that feedback. And then there's a link there if you want to learn more about us and the work that we do in digital, concurrent, virtual, hybrid, and all the work we do. There's a link there to our website as well. And just very briefly about who we are. So we believe that schools grow when people grow. And we take this belief and this kind of mantra into all the work we do with leaders and teams throughout the country. We work at the classroom level, deeply with teachers. We work at the school level with school leadership, and then a lot at the central office level as well, and have been around for 10 years. We're actually about to celebrate our 10-year anniversary in the next couple of weeks, so we're very excited about that. But partnering with districts across the country on everything from personalized learning to strategic planning, and a lot right now on hybrid, concurrent, virtual learning, which we're going to dive more into today. And more specifically, we love our Texas partnerships and our Texas districts. We have partnered across Texas. You'll see over the last couple of years, actually. So we've only started working in Texas, I think, the last 3 or 4 years, but we are so excited to continue to work with Texas districts and expand the work we're doing here. Yeah, we're big old Texas fans, so we're really excited to be here with you all today. A couple housekeeping logistics here. I think we all live our life on Zoom at this point, so these shouldn't be come as a surprise, but please stay on mute. We are not on webinar, we are on a meeting, right? So if you come off of mute, we can hear that background noise. We would love to have your video on. Chat, we're going to use the chat throughout the session, so please feel free to, at any point in time, drop things in the chat, questions, thoughts, reactions. And just an FYI, the session will be recorded. And finally, let's check in. So it's 2020, everything is kind of up in the air at this point, so we're on a rubber ducky scale today. And we would just love to know, on a scale of 1 to 9 in rubber duckies, where are you landing today? So coming into this webinar a week before Thanksgiving in a crazy, wild, wacky year, what rubber ducky is really speaking to you right now? And so just drop that in the chat. Okay, I see a lot of 2s, that's great. Some 3s, 4s.
Kristen, where are you on this rubber ducky scale right now?
So I was more like a 7. I feel like I've been running real fast for a couple of weeks straight. But it's lovely to hear that we have so many 1, 2, 3s, and 4s where you're just partially deflated. That shows that energy is high. We have a 9. I get it. We all have our 9 days. This is great. This gives us a good sense of the energy in the room, and a lot of 2s.
Awesome. So with that, we're going to go ahead and point towards our agenda and our objectives for how we're going to spend our time today. The reason we like to start every meeting with a check-in, and if you were a part of workshop 1, you know this already, it really sets the tone. It helps us know where folks are feeling as they're joining this session. What we're doing today is hopefully to take back in practice, not only with students in the classroom, but also with your team. Checking in with students and adults alike are a great way to kick off any meeting. So with that, really want to focus in on these 3 objectives that we're going to do over the next 90 minutes here. Understanding that concurrent instruction can look a lot of different ways in a lot of different contexts, and ultimately it really depends on the needs of the students in the classroom and the needs that the district teams are facing. And so with this, we really want to make sure that you leave here being able to articulate various ways concurrent instruction can look like in practice, develop strategies for implementing concurrent instruction, and really having a clear understanding of what a model might look like and how it aligns to what you're already doing, right? So I think Mavis brought up a really great point in the welcoming here This is a conversation that is hopefully extending the practices that you are already putting in place as we are collectively trying to figure this out, right? So we're also going to give you some time to explore some tools, some models, and do a little bit of creation here and sharing out for the good of the group. So to do this as we learn together, we're going to be using a process, see it, name it, do it. In the see it phase, we're going to really just norm on what we mean by concurrent instruction in the 3 different models. During the name it, we're going to provide some space and opportunity for you to self-select the model that you want to do a deeper dive into and really identify key components of practice that you want to try out. And then during the do it phase, we're going to give you a chance to create, to share out, and to give feedback with each other, and hopefully have a stronger sense of where you want to go next in terms of supporting your school, your team, and teachers across your district. Our lens for every workshop is through the Universal Design for Learning lens, and really thinking about this as a framework on how to develop lessons and plan assessments that are based in 3 main principles. And so when we think about when we think about the learning experience, what students are learning, really providing them opportunities to stimulate their interests, their motivations, understand the differentiation in the ways that they can express their learning, as well as presenting information and content in different ways, knowing that no two students are alike, that we all have different needs coming to the table. And with that, we really want to focus in on our push, which is designing equitable learning experiences for students with disabilities, students on the margins, students who need that support there. And as we think about concurrent learning models, really want to focus in on 2 questions here. Are remote students getting the same instruction that in-person students are getting? And is that instruction aligned to identified supports that those students need? As well as which concurrent models allow for opportunities to best differentiate instruction to meet the needs of diverse learners. The reasons why we think universal design learning is so important here is because when we design for students at the margins, everyone benefits, right? So whether it is thinking about automatic doors or adaptive technology within our smartphones, when that was designed to support people who needed those supports, we actually all benefit from it and get to use it as well. And so just a concrete example here about our lens and the way we are pushing to design these equitable learning experiences. In terms of materials to help you capture, strategize, and plan, we are using the same process we did in workshop 1. So if you weren't here, no worries. It's going to be the same process. Every workshop, we will introduce a new workbook. And so you'll be building your workbooks as we go. But to do this, you're going to click on this link. We'll add it to the chat. Thanks, Christina, for doing that already. You're going to click on that link. It's going to bring you to a folder. You'll find your district or organization. Once you get into that folder, you're going to open up the copy that was placed in there. Once you open up the copy, you're going to make a copy by going to File, Make a Copy. And the final step there is you want to add your name. You want to make sure everybody on your team knows this is your workbook. And so don't mess with it, right? So here's the folder here. If I'm part of Chapel Hill, I'll just there. You see that copy that's already there. I'll go into that copy. And under File, Make a Copy, I can make that copy there, rename it to add my name, and be good to go. We know we're moving pretty quick. We have a lot to cover today. And so if you have any problems accessing, feel free to just private Zoom chat somebody on the Education Elements team or the TEA team, and we can help make sure that you have access to your workbook there. But one more thing to note, there are going to be moments throughout our presentation where you'll see this icon and we will just pause and ask you to go to your workbook. And so once you get into your workbook here, you'll notice that there are going to be those spots here, and we will give you some space to go ahead and capture your thinking. Ultimately, though, if you're like Jay, it is 2 days before Thanksgiving break, and I got a lot more things to worry about. Nothing like some paper, a pen, capturing your notes there. Really just wanting to provide an opportunity for you to get your process, your thinking out, and have a place to revisit. So with that, we went through a lot of logistics in just about 12 minutes. So we're doing good on time. But before we jump into some more content, we want to provide a space. So Kristen, lead us through our first brain break.
All right, so this is one of my favorites. This is a great one to try with your kiddos or your in any Zoom context or in-person context. So we're gonna start with what's called Shake It Off. And I'm sorry it's so dark here. I have a ton of backlighting. And we're gonna start with your right hand and you're just gonna shake 5 times, then your left hand, your right foot, and your left foot. Feel free to stand up if you wanna get out of your seat a little bit and do some stretching. Then we're gonna count down to 4, 3, 2, 1. So I'm gonna demo and you can just jump in with me here. So we're gonna start with the right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right foot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Left foot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 1, 1, 1. And that is Shake It Off.
Awesome. Thanks, Kristen. So a great brain break, but after after learning something new or about to jump into something hard, just shaking off everything that we're leaving there. And so let's jump in. So in terms of what is concurrent instruction, we first want to just call out that districts across the country, across the state, are really operating in different ways. And here are just a few of the operating systems or ways that districts have designed engagement for students, right? So maybe it's an in-person lesson rolling out a few days later for virtual students once it's been taught to in-person students. A lot of districts are doing a high flex model where they are recording their in-school lessons and then using it as in a flipped way for those virtual students. Some districts are using live stream where they have teachers in school streaming live lessons for students at home. Regardless of what the operating system is, we're going to zoom in on specific concurrent models that you could use in the classroom, in instruction, to help support regardless of the operating system you're on. And one thing we know for sure about concurrent instruction is that it is overwhelming to figure out. It is definitely comes with challenges, but it's actually not something that is brand new or something that has been, birthed out of this pandemic. It's something that smaller universities have been using for a while now as they've tried to really address low enrollment or decreasing number of students within the university. We also see this as higher education has become more available for working people and families. And so one thing that we want to note here is that you have 2 resources here. If you are someone like Christina, our teammate, you're going to hear from it in a moment here, loving the research, loves to see kind of the thinking and the facts behind a model. These 2 resources here give you some more insight, some research-based practices, specifically coming out of the University of South Florida. We want to bring your attention down here to prioritizing strategies. And these are 4 of the things that we're going to think about and unpack as we go deeper into these concurrent models. Something else to note here is that with concurrent teaching comes a lot of new considerations that folks need to think about. And so in a moment, we're going to give you some space to reflect on what are the considerations that are top of mind. Are they similar to the that you see here? Are there other considerations? But want to just name here that some of the considerations are things like lesson pace is slower when it's virtual. So getting through content isn't going to happen at the same pace as it might have as in person. Student grouping is key, right? Really planning groups with greater intentionality is going to be an important piece to this. We see that, for a lot of districts, this is a really important factor and barrier to overcome as you start thinking about the marginalization that happens with in-person and at-home students learning at the same time. Relevance to students is really important here as we think about that intrinsic motivation and self-direction. Informative data is really that key data. That is really going to inform not only which concurrent model we want to try out for a specific lesson objective or unit, but also where students are and what they might need. Let's take a moment here to pause and get into your workbook. Thanks for everyone being flexible with your workbooks if it was giving you trouble to make a copy, but want to just bring your attention here to slide 4 in your workbook. I'll go to my template here. And so in this slide, you will see the question here, and just delete that text and put a thought down. What are some considerations that are especially top of mind for you as you consider implementing concurrent learning models? I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to reflect to this question in your workbook. So as you're thinking about other considerations that are top of mind for you as you are implementing concurrent models, Christina is able to make a copy of your workbook. If you're having trouble, just send her a message and she will do that for you. Go ahead and wrap up that thought there. We're also going to provide some space for you to just share out, because I think what is really important here is we have a lot of folks on the line, 85 to be exact, that are probably facing a lot of the same challenges. And so we'd love for folks to either share out in your in the chat or come off mute even, and just share out what are some of the considerations that are really top of mind for you as you are either a teacher designing and implementing concurrent models in your own classroom, or a district and school leader supporting those teachers with doing so. Anybody willing to share?
I'll share.
Oh,
One thing to take in consideration is student and teacher access to internet and having reliable devices.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that so much. Very important considerations, especially as you think about what that experience is going to look like and how the digital tools that you might be relying on to collaborate and have students connect is key here. I think somebody else was coming off mute to share out as well.
I was going to talk about the digital too, but also how can you meet the needs of all your students because they got different learning styles. So how can you make that connection and make sure that you are giving each student or meeting their needs when you're doing this concurrent teaching and along with that, with the digital too. So
Yeah, definitely wanting to make sure that there is differentiation, that there is opportunity for students. And we see this in the chat, a lot of folks saying things like the pacing, right? The path, the ways in which students are demonstrating their learning and their understanding of a concept really needs to be personalized and based on where students are at. Anybody else?
What I'm seeing a lot of the teachers struggle with are accommodations for our ELL and SPED students. It's kind of hard. They're really struggling with reading the nonverbal cues of body language from students. You know, when they don't understand, especially for kids that's trying to learn English, trying to learn the language. So they need that face-to-face presence. So I can see certain things. They can see our body language. We can see theirs. But if they don't have cameras on, or if they're there just verbally and you don't see them and they don't really see you up close, you know, they struggle.
Such a good point. And I think, you know, even experiencing something like this, right? It brings reading the room to a whole new level, right? How can we really measure and figure out what it exactly you might need, right? How we can better support you, how we can make adjustments. And so having those considerations, all of these considerations top of mind are going to be really key. The reason why we really appreciated you sharing and we wanted to start with this here is because we understand that when looking at models, it's easy to think about, you know, how it won't work, or sometimes it might seem like it's a quick fix, right? Or something that is expected to happen overnight. And we really just want to acknowledge there are considerations that you all are keeping top of mind as you think about supporting students, supporting teachers. And so keep these considerations. And as you dive into these learning models even deeper, how are those considerations showing up? What are the challenges that these models might present themselves with that you would also need to kind of think about and solve and support teachers with thinking about as well. Awesome. Keep the conversation going in the chat there. Really loving everyone sharing out. And I'm going to jump into thinking about how these considerations also align to what students actually need. And we heard this from a few folks here in terms of really meeting those needs. And we like to think about it in terms of that Maslow's hierarchy and thinking about identifying and addressing from the bottom up, right? So if we can develop a learning experience, whether we are all in person, all virtual, or a mix of both, how are we helping create a space for connection, to develop psychological safety for students and for teachers so that they are able to take those risks, are able to try out new things, and then step back and reflect to see what worked and what could be improved, right? We believe that once there is connection and once materials, there's a clear routine and system to access materials, then you can focus in and move up the triangle here to ultimately support students throughout the learning process. But really starting small with ways to help build connection and routines to help students access those materials is really step 1 and 2. We're going to do a brief overview of the 3 concurrent models, and then we're going to allow you to, not allow you, we're going to give you space to choose one of these models to dive deeper into. So the 3 that we consider as our base models, 2 look pretty similar. Station rotation model, if you're familiar with that in person. We have one called the split station rotation model. What you're going to notice about all 3 The opening and the closing are pretty similar. It's some type of checking in, overview of what the learning experience, what the lesson objective is going to be, and then some type of closing, right? Where you are collecting formative assessment, an exit ticket, some type of data to measure if students were able to accomplish that lesson objective that you planned for them. It's the middle piece where it gets a little different for each model. You can also see that these models are on a spectrum, right? From teacher-driven to student-driven. As we move to the right, the model then kind of shares its dependence on who is really driving the process. So the first one is the split station rotation. This one really is the most familiar and most aligned to what teachers are used to in the classroom if they do things like morning meeting, teacher table, targeted instruction in small groups, which we know most districts are focused on. In terms of in-person and virtual, you can see here the virtual students in green, the yellow are students who are in person, while the teacher is working in a targeted small group with in-person, virtual students are working through independent practice, and then the teacher switches with that group. So then the teacher is now working with virtual students in a targeted small group, and then the in-person student, they're doing independent practice. They move into some type of collaboration discussion, and then an exit ticket here. The next one would be the integrated station rotation model. This is where we take students who are in person and virtual, and we group them together. Again, you'll see the opening and the closing there pretty similar. Big difference here is after the mini lesson, there is some type of check for understanding where you are collecting real-time data. That real-time data is going to allow you to create targeted groups based on that data. While this takes a little bit more front-loading and planning and grouping in real time might take some practice, you would definitely want to make sure your groups are aligned to that data. Otherwise, there would be really no point with this. So how can you group students, both in person and virtual, based on the data that you got from this check for understanding? One big rule here, we definitely recommend that you would never group one virtual student with 2 or more in-person students. We just think that that would cause even more marginalization that's already happening since that virtual student isn't actually in the room. So to do this, if you only had, my stepson is in high school, he's, I think, one of 5 students in his chemistry class. And so if I was his teacher trying out this model, what I might do is group, 2 virtual with 2 in person. And then the rest of the groups would be virtual once I run out of in-person students. In terms of flipped model, this is the most student directed and really is aligned to goal setting and having students work through a plan asynchronously while the teacher is doing one-on-one check-ins with students and providing some feedback. So again, you can see as we move through the spectrum, really wanting to keep those considerations in mind, as well as what could you do tomorrow, what could you try next semester, and ultimately what might you try next school year. Sometimes thinking about that in terms of actions is going to be really helpful and not feel so overwhelming. So as you build in the scaffold around goal setting for students, then it's about giving them space to work through something like a playlist or a choice board, some adaptive software there before coming together and doing a check for understanding and reviewing that data as a class. Those are really high level overviews of what those models are. Mostly we wanted you to just be able to have enough information to decide which one do you want to jump into a breakout around and go even deeper. And so with that, the way we're going to do this is you can see here we have numbers. This is why we were asking you to add your district name or organization to your Zoom name, because the way we're going to have you select your breakout is a similar process. So if you hover over the 3 dots in your Zoom box in the top right-hand corner, you should see an option that says rename. Keep everything the same, so you can see my name and my Zoom box as Jason Education Elements, And all you're going to do is add the number at the beginning that you want, that represents the breakout you want to go to. So for example, I'm going to be in breakout 2. And so you can see I just renamed myself with a 2 in front. So we're going to play some music for about 60 seconds. We'll do a brain break. So we have some time built in to give you an opportunity to rename yourself. We can help you out as well. But right now you should be thinking about which concurrent model do you want to go deeper into, and then changing or adding the number of that model to your Zoom name. All right, and thanks for folks putting it into the chat. We'll continue, on our end, we'll try to rename you. And as we do that, Christina's gonna lead us into a little brain break before we jump in.
Great. Thanks, Jason, and really excited to be with you all this morning. As someone who grew up in New Mexico, definitely a big Southwest fan. So glad to be supporting Texas this morning. We wanted to take a second to start off with setting an intention before we jumped into breakouts. Something that came through in the chat and as you all were sharing is thinking about participation with students and engagement as we're in virtual or in-person settings. And setting an intention might be one way that you tap into some of those goal setting opportunities. So before we get into our time, think about which mantra really applies to how you want to enter into that breakout space. Are you thinking about maybe that you are ready to learn something new, that you want to embrace a new idea to be action-oriented to produce new results? Are you thinking about really improving the thoughts that you're having and getting better and better? So take a moment and think about which mantra really applies to you that you want to step into for our breakouts. Don't add the number to the chat because that might get confusing on which group you want to be in as we're trying to rename, but just hold for yourself which mantra you would like to embody as you jump into some new learning on one of these 3 models. So I'll give you a second to read over them, think about which one applies, or maybe you're bringing your own mantra with you. For me, I think I'm going to be embodying number 4, thinking better as I think better thoughts, growing with what you all are bringing as experts in this space, excited to think better and better.
Your experiences, and as Christy said, whether interesting, successful, or really big flops, I think we can learn a lot from those. So one thing we want to just call out here, I mentioned this in the whole group, and Tamara, I'm going to work on getting you to that group 3 right now. As we look at this station rotation, here are some considerations, some things that we want to just highlight. And I think the most important thing to really prioritize in any model is really the scaffolding and the supports that are happening at the stations where students are working on their own, right? What we find is station rotation is the most common first step. It really aligns to what teachers tend to do in their classrooms in person. And so now what I love about this model is it really allows some freedom and, definitely some constraints that we have to design within to start thinking about how we can connect students, whether they are in person or virtually together. And so continue to think about the considerations that were top of mind for you and your experiences here. Christian, thanks for adding that success in there. Those that were ahead of the distance learning curve and had blended learning experience seems to really be helping you all. And so how can we align those practices across campuses and support students with that. Here's a bigger picture of that tiny little screenshot I shared with you all in that overview. But again, you can see here, you have some type of whole group connecting and kickoff, both in the check-in as well as some type of mini lesson. And then you have this asynchronous exit ticket where you're able to collect the data. It's what's happening in the middle that could look different. All of these models are just prototypes. And at the end of the session today, you're going to have a chance to build your own. That might look like this, but it might look different based on your own context. And so just keep that in mind, that this isn't like the silver bullet here, but just options for teachers to think about. I said this in the group here, but this piece is really important for this integrated station rotation model. There's no point in doing all of this work and all of this planning if you aren't grouping students based on data, right? And so where it's different, the split station rotation, data is not involved in the grouping there. You are grouped based on your location. If you're in person, you're in this group. If you are virtual, you're in this group. Here's really the opportunity to connect students based on specific data, but then also keeping those considerations in mind as you are grouping students. Again, thinking about, if Lisa and I are together virtually, we'd have another student in person, but I would never be placed in a group with 3 in-person students, because that would just add to this separation and this feeling of disconnection that we're trying to avoid here as we bring students together. As the teachers at the targeted group here, you also see there is opportunity for some collaboration, some scaffolded practices. We're going to highlight some digital tools, but I thought it was really important, as mentioned from folks on the call here, to consider the equitable access to these digital tools, and that is definitely one thing that districts would have to plan for and think about in terms of creating this process within the learning experience. Benefits here, it allows more of that differentiation. When students are grouped based on data, then you're able to align the experience to meet those needs, to push students further or to support students with any misconceptions. It allows that connection that we hear so often from districts that is just missing, right? Between students being able to just share their ideas, share their thinking, right? And the other important note here is that it could be split across multiple days, which I think takes a lot of pressure off of teachers on the planning end, right? That this wouldn't be something new you would do day to day. It could be if it met the needs of your students, if you were able to plan that way, but you could also see this as being one class meeting together, then maybe the next class meeting, and then doing some type of formative assessment or assessment performance task to check for understanding there. So thinking about getting creative in the ways that you're breaking this up. Also, take a look at those considerations and think about how they align to those other considerations that you had already mentioned in your workbook. So in terms of considerations, there's a lot more transitions, which means there's going to be a lot more things to plan and to help students and practice with students, right? Going from, just like with anything. So think about group work, think about all those ways that you are creating self-direction within students. There's going to be some need for some routines and procedures here as you are building in those norms and the ways in which students are engaging while you're at the targeted group with your small group. There's going to be some supports here as students might be working independently through a playlist or through some type of process where they are learning. Another consideration here is how you are showing all students the same visual. And I think I heard this when we were sharing out earlier as well, is it just kind of changes the way we're used to facilitating, right? The talking points, the way I got students' attention, whether it was 1, 2, 3, all eyes on me, or clap once if you can hear me, those moves that tend to become part of our DNA, right? Our spiel, our elevator pitch, those things also have to be changed. And for teachers who are trying this out for the first time, that feels uncomfortable. That's almost, to me, probably the most intimidating piece. How do I share this without without falling all over myself in the way that I say this? How can I be really clear in my expectations with students? And then the next thing we want to think about here is just breaking it down from chunk to chunk. You're going to see that we have some guiding questions here. So if you are thinking, how can I take this information back to teachers within my district? How can I troubleshoot this with teachers on my team? These guiding questions are hopefully some starting places that you can think about. And you'll find that they probably align to the questions that you are also thinking about within your lesson planning and the ways in which your team is planning. In terms of tech tools, one thing I want to call out here is really not only thinking about those device headphones if students are in person, but also the assistive technology that students with disabilities really rely on, right? How are those factored into this experience for students? And then thinking about these guiding questions here, especially starting with this standard. What is the lesson objective that you want to focus in on and cover as you go through this integrated station rotation? As we move into targeted small group, here's where you really want to think about collecting that data. What data are you going to use? Oops, sorry. What data are you wanting to use to create the small groups? And then once you do that, how is this going to support you with differentiating those groups? Love it. Thanks, Stormy, for sharing that. Keep this coming. Yeah, a YouTube video on how to create and use Google Meet. Perfect. In terms of small groups, again, I think I'd zoom in here on those routines and procedures. How are students going to troubleshoot individual tech issues? It looks like we're actually having some tech issues right now. I think Kimberly, our teammate leading breakout 1, just got booted out because of internet, and those things are going to happen, right? There's going to need to be some backup plans here that don't always require the teacher's attention or the teacher leaving that targeted instruction, that small group, right? So what are students able to do to troubleshoot? What's going to be the process to help? What are the roles that students are going to be assigned and take ownership on? And I think, as with anything, giving space to practice, giving space to mess up is really key here. Even though we feel like we're racing against the clock in terms of figuring out this engagement and what it looks like, we have to make sure that we are building in time for students to just get used to it and practice, right? It might flop the first couple times, but ultimately it will become a part of the routines and procedures in your class. And they're your best insight. I think so often around my time in the classroom in Dallas, and how, oftentimes I was really struggling with figuring out the best way to support students. And I don't understand why it took me so long to be like, why don't I just ask them, right? Like, why don't I just find out from them what's working and what's not? Why not collaborate and figure this out together, right? So try out some roles, but maybe students are going to say, you know what, these roles aren't helping us accomplish the task we need. Thinking about ways that you can build in student voice and co-collaborate this experience together. In terms of scaffolded practice, if you're using choice boards or playlists, if you're thinking about adaptive software that you're using, this would be a great opportunity for students to do that within this rotation model here. As always, you're going to want to think about what what the tool is that you're going to use to scaffold that practice, and then provide some opportunity here for students to get comfortable with that, right? Sometimes we think because students are living in an age of technology that they are automatically more tech savvy than we are, but want to also make sure they understand, how to click through a Google slide, right? Like how to pause a video so that they can reflect, or rewind so they can hear the concept explained again. So things that are just don't want to take for granted or forget to think about as we're planning this out. And then ultimately that exit ticket, the formative data is really that key data as you think about, all right, students had a space to learn. Did they master the objective that I was hoping they would master? Where do they fall? And what do I need to do next to help address any misconceptions or support them in any way? As you think about these models here, what is top of mind for you? What's coming to mind either in the chat or off mute as you're thinking about this model and the different guiding questions and considerations?
I like this idea of a mini lesson and then grouping and then check for understanding. I think we had it like a mini lesson and then following the gradual release, and then we had a check for understanding, and then we broke out into groups. And I think it was kind of losing some of the virtual kids at that point. I think that's where the teachers are struggling. But if it's part of like just the whole just your whole reading block, I still worry about the time, because I know many campuses have a structured that we have 1 hour of enrichment or guided reading time, and that's just a long time to have kids on at one time is still a struggle, I think, using this model here and meeting all kids' needs, I guess.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing. Anybody want to just respond to Susanna and anything resonating from her share out, or have something else to share?
Yeah, I'll share. I think that there's just balance. You've got to find a balance in all of it. But specifically for me, the 2-to-1 piece was huge. I myself had participated in virtual learning, and there were 3 of us face-to-face and 1 virtual. And I found that I really had to work hard to make sure that everybody brought that person into the conversation. So for me, the big, powerful takeaway is that if you have 2 virtual and 1 face-to-face, it really, I hate to use the word balance again, but it really balances the interactivity. So that was a really big takeaway for me, something that I'm anxious to share back with my teams.
Yeah, thanks, Stormy. That was some really great insight we gained from working with districts and teachers across. I think so often there's maybe an assumption in heads like the numbers are equal, right? So when you just group students, it's going to work out magically. And so by doing that too, it also impacts the way you're planning, right? Because then even your collaboration station is going to look a little different for those groups that are all in person, and then those groups that have that hybrid, right? And so that's just another layer to think about. One thing I wanted to make sure we showed you, and again, I think it's important to note here that the conversations around access and equity are really important here. So by no means are we suggesting that that isn't something to consider, but we know that sometimes it's hard to see like, okay, but really like as a teacher, what would I do? What might I use to get this done? And Susanna, I think you brought up a really good point in terms of time as well, and just want to double down there in terms of, you know, thinking about this in less as in like one sitting, but breaking it into chunks. And here are just some digital tools that might be helpful. You also have tools that you're probably using, whether it's Pear Deck or, you know, Seesaw to have students demonstrate and show their learning. So these are just some of the tools, and we just place them here to kind of show like what a teacher could do, right? So a teacher could use Padlet to have students check in at the same time, and then use Nearpod for students as they're working through content in whole group. That Nearpod could help them collect that check for understanding, that formative data, that then I could use a Google slide to project, here are the groups for tomorrow's lesson or for the next 30 minutes. Here is the order in which you will go through these stations here, right? In the station rotation here, you know, I'm here at the teacher table working with my small group and probably have some type of Google Doc or technology there that I'm presenting on. Maybe students are collaborating in Jamboard here. And so this is an example too of, you know, if we're not ready to have students in a breakout room, maybe having them still collaborate through a digital tool could meet that need of connection, right? I know there are varying perspectives around students in breakout rooms by themselves. Some folks consider that to be like a teacher leaving the room. Other folks consider it to be like a students working at a table by themselves in group work. And so wherever you fall, using a digital tool to collaborate with students and not relying on breakout rooms could be an option. Scaffolded practice, maybe it's a Google Doc that provides a playlist, and then you have that asynchronous exit ticket in a Google form. Things like quizzes, your adaptive software like Imagine Math, you know, Quizlet, Kahoot, Edpuzzle, all of those digital tools are also ways that you could include the how into capturing what students are doing and how you're supporting them. Love that, Tina. I like how and when to use the tech tools. We introduced the tools, but effective use was not considered. Yeah, I think that's a big struggle, right? If there's any school leaders out there, I know you feel this pain around spending so much money on technology and then finding that sometimes that technology ends up just piling up in a room or not used, right? And so it's really thinking about the intentionality behind how we're supporting teachers with using it, helping them feel comfortable. If you're a fan of George Couros, you know, we can't expect teachers to try something different if they don't experience something different themselves. So really even thinking about how you're engaging with teachers and professional development experiences that introduce these different tech tools and help them get more comfortable with it. Nicole, I love that you are mentioning, I can see how an exit ticket can be used to collect data on a student's IEP goal as well. Very important here. This is only one breakout. Just want to call attention here because we are going to come back pretty soon. But want to call attention for all three models, we've done the same thing and we did our best to use different tools. But you can see in the flipped model, we kind of added slides here of different technology integration that you could use, as well as up here at the very top one with the split station rotation, you can see some different technology there as well. So you have those resources here. Some things we want you to consider before we close the breakouts here, and you can do this in your workbook. Take yourself out of the driver's seat for a moment if you're a classroom teacher. Stop putting that pressure on yourself to figure out how to do this overnight. Get into a coaching corner. Think about it through this lens. Whether you are a district leader who's coaching teachers or you are a teacher who might coach someone else, what is something a teacher might try tomorrow that could align to embedding this model or starting to build stamina with this model? And what would you push a teacher to consider when planning this model? What would you push a teacher to consider when planning this model? Take a moment to capture that in your work.
So as we're going through, we can think about picking up new strategies for our virtual context, even though this might be a model that some of us are familiar with or that the teams we support are familiar with. So as we're thinking about station models specifically, these are some of the things that we really want to focus on as we're building the muscles for this particular type of instruction. So we want to make sure that there are lots of opportunities for scaffolded practice, thinking about there are a lot of moving pieces, and we want to get students really comfortable in each of the spaces of this instructional model before we roll it out as a whole. We also know that student grouping becomes really important as you think about which students are where. And we also want to make sure that students have a really clear understanding of what they should be doing and when they should be doing it. So how can you make sure that you are clearly displaying instructions in student-friendly language and making sure that it's really clear what is happening in the classroom? Another piece that you might be thinking about with station models are the roles within particular groups. So how can you really build some of those collaboration skills as students are functioning within those groups? So when we're thinking about this model, even though this might be familiar to you, what we're thinking about today with the station rotation model is that split station example. So because we have the context of having some students in person and some students virtually, this is one way that you might organize, either as a way to scaffold staff comfort with doing small groups, that it becomes easier to focus on virtual students and then students face-to-face. What we'll do is go through each stage of this model with some guiding questions and some particular decisions that we suggest you have teachers make at each particular level. And then we'll have some time at the end to just talk about how you might support teachers or other staff members to roll this model out. But again, feel free to add to the chat any questions that you have throughout our time together. I know we only have about 20 minutes. So we want to think about some of the things that are really helpful about this model. When you choose any particular instructional model, there are always considerations and benefits. And so we think that using this split model is really helpful just from a teacher's perspective, because the environment is going to determine those natural groups. There aren't as many transitions, and the technology component doesn't become as important because students are either in the virtual group or the in-person group, versus the other station rotation model where you might be grouping virtual and in-person students together. This also, like you noticed in the chat, feels more familiar to many teachers, and you can also use it across multiple days. But something that we really want to make sure that we're considering are questions of equity. So making sure that virtual students and students in person are getting a similar experience. But it does create an environment where differentiation, because you're only doing it based on virtual and in person, differentiation is harder to do with those groupings. So really keeping in mind, where are those opportunities for differentiation since your groups are based on environment? Any questions here or reflections or ideas before we jump to the first part of our station model? Gonna check the chat just to make sure I'm not missing anything. All right, again, feel free to add anything. This first part is really just us going through, and we'll have some chances to discuss and reflect later on. So when we're thinking about the beginning of our lesson, this is something that Jason shared at the beginning. Each of the models begins with this lesson opening and check-in and a mini lesson. So you might think about how, as a coach or a school-based leader, that you're supporting teachers to really think about how they can use this as an opportunity for collaboration, and also the routines that they're going to set to make sure that the rest of the class goes really smoothly. So how are students accessing materials? How are they asking questions as the experience goes on? And what is going to be the instructional focus for that particular day? So these are all questions that you could use to guide a coaching conversation, or thinking about really looking at a teacher's opportunities that they can work through. One thing that we want to make sure that we emphasize is that we're really being clear about the tech tools that we're using. So thinking about beyond just the technology that you need to work with your virtual students, what is the assistive technology that you're going to need to provide for all students to make sure that you're meeting all of their needs? Any questions about the first part of our lesson, either the lesson opening or the mini lesson? I taught middle and high school, so wait time doesn't make me feel uncomfortable, but also recognize that this might be the space as a learner that you want to be listening. So either way feels fine. And also, again, this is a fairly familiar model where you have the opening, the check-in, and then you're doing a quick mini lesson. When we're thinking about the middle of class, we really want to focus on our targeted instruction. So thinking about setting up independent practice for the group that you're not working with directly. And then what is the focus of those targeted groups when you are working directly with students, whether they're in person or virtual. So thinking about how can you make sure that your routines and procedures are equitable across both groups? What are the ways that students are going to demonstrate their thinking? And how can they ask questions if they're having trouble either accessing the material or the tech platform if they're on the virtual group? When we're thinking about independent practice, this might also be a space where you feel more familiar or your teams feel more familiar, where you're using things like choice boards or playlists, where there's an opportunity for some of that differentiation, even when you are not working with students one-on-one or in small groups. But again, this is really where you can help support teachers and teams so that they're building in those routines, and the independent practice becomes a space that they don't have to directly monitor. I wonder if anyone who's used station rotation or supports teams who are using it, if they have any suggestions about best practices or things that they've seen go well in this particular model of station rotation, of having some students work independently while others are in groups. Feel free to come off mute or be in the chat. Anything that you've seen work well about station rotation models?
I think it would be important to make sure you're being very strategic about which group has the independent practice first. And so it would be, a understanding of how your student groups can master the material and what's that independent practice, and designing which group had access to the teacher in the small group prior to or following the independent practice.
Thanks for sharing, Rachel. I think this is something that we often see even when we're rolling out station rotation or trying it out in an adult setting, is that it can often feel pretty jarring to be in that independent group right away if you're not sure what you're doing. So being really clear about who's doing what first can be helpful. The other thing that you might consider doing either in a PLC or with your coaching conversations is pressure testing some of these. So going through the experience as a learner and seeing what are the questions that come through as you're participating in a particular lesson. That way you can solve some of the problems beforehand versus later on. So we'll jump into the last part of the model where we're thinking about after the students have gone through that station rotation of independent practice and small group with the teacher, that we suggest having some sort of collaboration experience since it's been more teacher directed or students working independently. This might be a good opportunity for small group discussions and being really intentional about how you structure that space. So like Jason shared, being really clear that you don't want to have more in-person students than virtual students, that this can be a way for you to break down barriers to make sure that students feel safe entering those conversations. But again, thinking about what are the routines that you're setting up so that students know how to participate, what their role is, and what their outcome is in that particular environment. I see a comment from Tanya that this was really helpful using a small group station rotation lesson plan. And how has it been going? And Tanya, if you can't come off mute, that's okay too.
No, I can actually. We've done it for the last 3 weeks. And so we had a PLC in which we provided the teachers with some of the examples on how to implement station rotations, and just looking at like Friday's assessments, and then using the small group lesson plan to incorporate to make sure that the stations were dealing with the lowest TEAC. And having a teacher station, and that the first week was a little bit rough, just kind of setting up the classroom, getting the students kind of in that routine, and then being able to distinguish, how do we do that virtually, like the breakout groups, and so scheduling that. So the first week went a little bit rough, but we're on week 3 now, and it's going much, much better. And you definitely are able to see the progress the students are making, because you're able to assess them more frequently and kind of in a smaller group, and it's more skill-based. So I think the station rotations allow us to be more purposeful in our planning. So at first the teachers felt it was just like another thing to do, but they really have seen the benefits of doing that. And I think in the long run, we will see better academic growth for when we're using this model.
Tanya, there are a lot of things that came through in what you were sharing around the way that you had a specific planning template to be able to support this new model. Also, the way that you all decided how you were going to prioritize different standards within that teacher group, and being really intentional about what happens in that teacher-directed space. And then also thinking about your short-term and long-term goals, that being okay that the first week doesn't look perfect, but that by week 3, you're really celebrating those successes and even looking forward. So as leaders, really giving that comfort and confidence, knowing that adjusting in the midst of a ton of other changes can be really daunting. So thank you for sharing. Anyone else who would like to share here? Jen, I see your comment around practicing procedures, using things like timers and alarms. Anything else that you wanted to share that has been particularly helpful as you all have been using station rotation model, Jen?
Sorry, we have very limited internet here at our office. It's been down all day. Basically, and I've done it in previous districts as well, but really, just like with in person, you have to practice the procedures. A 5-year-old can go in and out of their station rotation. You just have to practice it. And it does take some strategy. It takes some kind of planning ahead of time of telling them what to do if something doesn't work. And then just making sure that teachers are okay with knowing you're going to have problems, and just to stay calm and, what to do and how to navigate and how to troubleshoot. And I think that's some of the things that our teachers experience, is that kind of fear of what if it doesn't work? What if they don't come back on when it's their time to rotate? And that's something that we've just been trying to help them kind of navigate and get through. So that's what we've experienced so far.
Thanks for sharing, Jen. The piece around setting up not only the structures and supports for students in the moment and for teachers to plan there, but what happens after the lesson? How can they really reflect on what went well? What are some of the challenges and pain points that we can solve around, and feeling really safe to take risks? I think the more that we can create those psychologically safe team environments, the more teachers and teams are going to be willing to try something new and be okay sharing when something didn't go exactly right. When we think about closing out the lesson, this is something also that might feel very familiar to you all or the teachers and teams that you support, but using some sort of formative or summative assessment that you're then using to prioritize your instruction and your groups for the next day. So again, thinking about even though the environment is driving who makes up those groups with virtual and in person, using something like we were sharing in the beginning around which group comes to you first might be really driven by this exit ticket. So being really clear about what you're assessing based on your priorities, and then thinking about how you're using that data through a cycle. One thing to note is that we're going to be pulled back to the whole group in just a couple minutes. But in our last couple minutes, just wanted to share out, this is something you can dive into later or think about what are the things you're already using. But we wanted to share an example of the way that the technology tools can map onto this model. So you might start your opening and check-in in the Zoom meeting, and then use something like Google Slides to drive your mini lesson, and then use something like Nearpod to really have students access their independent practice tasks. And then thinking about if there is some sort of platform that you all are familiar with for goal setting and for doing that exit ticket. So as we get into our planning time later on in the session, this might be something that you return to see, are there things you can take from this, or are there places that you would use something different? In our last minute, and we'll probably get pulled out back to the main group in just a second, we have just a couple of reflection questions. Feel free to use your workbook if that feels helpful for you, or just think about it yourself. Of what are the things that you might suggest for a teacher to start with if they wanted to try this out tomorrow? What would that first step look like? And what are some of the things that you might consider really supporting with your teams? So maybe formative assessment is that place where you really need to push the teacher teams to consider, or maybe it's around which group you're going to see first, or how you choose that priority TEK. But think about where some of those opportunity areas are with the groups and teams that you support.
So we are going to do a virtual gallery walk. Remember, we kicked off our time together today talking about everything we are doing is hopefully a model and example of ways that you can bring this back to your team. This is a big risk, but we can't talk about concurrent models, and we can't expect you all to engage with students if we weren't also modeling some risks. So we are actually going to be doing a really quick sprint of prototyping a concurrent model, and then do a virtual gallery walk. So think about if we were all in the same room with our favorite sticky poster paper, and working together in a group on something, and then providing space in a carousel to do a gallery walk. We're going to do that same thing, but it's going to be virtual. So here's how we're going to do it. Right now, I only want you to focus on step 1 and 2. You're going to use the materials in your workbook to create a concurrent model. And here's what it might look like, right? So here's an example of one concurrent model where you can see they have used icons to think about what the learning experience is going to look like from start to finish. Maybe this will work, maybe it won't, right? But what I love about it is this person aligned it to something they're already doing in terms of gradual release. As a teacher, they are already doing the I do, we do, you do. And so they are just using that as inspiration to create the experience. If you're like, you just threw a lot of information at me, I'm coming out of this breakout and I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed, I don't have the energy to think about my own experience, then what we want you to do is take one of ours. But the catch here is you need to add boxes here and think about what are the strategies and tools that might happen here. So in every breakout, we showed you different digital tools. I want to push you to even think about the teacher moves, right? Those strategies, the ways in which we are encouraging accountable talk and checks for understanding throughout a lesson. Where would those live? So to do that, you just add boxes and add your text there. So again, you're feeling ready to go. You want a blank canvas to create your prototype. Example 1 is what your finished product might look like. you need some space to process, you're going to use one of our prototypes that we shared, but you're going to add to it and share out the digital tools and strategies a teacher might use. In your workbook, you'll see this slide. It gives you the directions here. You'll delete that text and build your design. You'll also insert a description. We find that oftentimes we feel more comfortable and confident when we are prepared to share out and talk about it. So how might you explain your design to someone else? And then I really want to draw your attention here to the learning objectives. As we mentioned before, learning objectives should really be driving the process, not the other way around, right? And so depending on what it is students are working towards mastery on, that might inform the concurrent model that you're choosing or the path that you're designing for students. To help you do this, we got two things. I'm going to ask you to stop your video. If it's helpful for you, stay on mute. We're going to play this timer here. You're only going to have 10 minutes. So we want you to keep track of time. If you have questions, feel free to come off mute or ask in the chat. And then in your workbook, you have all of these materials here. You have a learning objective that is upcoming in the next few weeks, use that. If you don't have a learning objective and you want to just use one of ours, just pull one of those. You have icons here that you can build. If you're thinking about example 2, you could just copy and paste one of these and then begin to add text to those digital tools and strategies. Any clarifying questions in the chat or coming off mute before I start the 10-minute timer? All right, here's the real question here. Thumbs up if you want music for work time, thumbs down if you want it quiet. Thumbs up for music for work time, down if you want it quiet. Lynette's like, I guess music, but keep it low. All right, that sounds fair. Cool. I'm gonna start the 10-minute timer now. Around planning and helping teachers think about specific moves that they might make and really planning and experiencing, whether it's digital tools or different strategies, helping them experience something different in order to create something different. And so that's part of our intention here. As we think about how to show your work, we're going to focus in on step 3 and 4. Now, in your workbook, it says slide 68, but it's actually slide 76 as we've made some adjustments to the main deck. But ultimately, you're just going to copy and paste your prototype, and you're going to paste it in this main deck after slide 76. Once you do that, you can start giving feedback to folks. To do that, we have it here on slide 72. You could just click on the slide you want, insert, comment, and then let them know, what do you like about it? What is the wondering you have about it? So we'd love for you to do that. You can see here we have example 1 already there. So we're looking for your prototypes to come after example 1 here. You're just copying and pasting from your workbook. So file, nope, sorry, edit, copy, and then you are going to the main one. Awesome, we have somebody already there, and you're just pasting it into the main slide. Thanks, Mavis, for the main deck again. The EE team is on deck here. As folks are adding in their examples, feel free to start giving them feedback. We're gonna do this for about 5 minutes. So get those examples in there.
Could you go over again? Where do we go to?
Yep, for sure. So in your workbook that you've been working in, you have your prototype. It's probably on slide 9 here. And so you'll just copy and paste. So edit, copy. I've copied that slide. This is in your workbook. And then in the main deck, maybe just put that into the chat there. You can see where folks are adding the slide here. You can just, you can paste that slide there so that it shows up. Did that help, Trent?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. All right, we got 2 so far. Let's see if we can't get at least 30 more. Share out your prototype. It could be in various stages. There's no judgment here. We're just learning from each other and also practicing a strategy that we could take back and use with students.
Jason, I might be in the wrong spot. Saying I have you only. I see things popping up, but I can't paste anything.
Yeah, no worries. If you refresh, we just opened up the link for you, so that might be causing a little bit of trouble there. Let me know if that works.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Through these models, we've talked a lot about building routines and procedures and scaffolds. I think this is an example of, you know, had we been in the classroom, probably building up to this skill, right? Obviously having a little bit more time than this, but making sure students know how to copy and paste, making sure that they had access to the right deck and able to edit that access. These are looking great. So as you copy and paste yours in, then start looking at these other models. Love these descriptions here. I'm not sure who did 84, but I love how it's reading. I love how it at least the way I'm reading it, it's kind of like step by step. Feels really easy to follow. Love slide 90. It's one tool. I'm making an assumption here that that tool is something that is currently used, and you're showing how you're going to use that tool throughout the process. If I'm a teacher and you're asking me to do this, this already makes me feel like, okay, I can do this, right? About 2 more minutes. I just want to celebrate everyone who is getting their prototypes into the main deck. If you're having trouble, let us know. Christina's looks like she's going in there and adding screenshots and helping folks out. So reach out to us. Let us know if we can help you. And then take a look at other folks. How does your model align to theirs? How is it different? Awesome. Loving these examples here, and really appreciate you all naming specific strategies and tools that you could use throughout. 90 minutes is never enough time to cover the complexity of concurrent models, but hopefully you are walking away feeling like you are more comfortable and confident with articulating, whether that is what concurrent instruction is or how you and your district are approaching this. Hopefully you have some ideas for how you can develop these strategies and some tools to explore. And ultimately, we want you to make sure that you remember that you have these slides. TA is going to also share out the recording here, and this workbook is you're gonna have access to this. So it's not going away. Hopefully this is the start of conversations that you can have with your team and continue. And as always, the team at Education Elements as well as TA are here to help support you as you think through this. So don't hesitate to reach out. We're going to do a few things as we close out together. So first, just want to share some gratitude here. You all brought a lot of value. Risky, taking some time with, over 75 people on the line to do a virtual gallery walk, but take some time and share that out. We'll continue to walk through how you can share out your prototype. In the chat, if you could come check out with this. I used to think blank about concurrent instruction, and now I think blank. And then we're also going to put the closing survey into the chat as well. We'd love for you to be able to take that. That's going to help us know how we can improve and how this experience was. So I just put the closing survey in the chat for you. Take some time to complete that and check out. If you're still wondering how to copy and paste from your workbook, you'll just copy the slide from your workbook and add it to the slide, slides 76 or after. Make sure you take that closing survey. We'll drop it in there one more time. Love Laura's checkout here. That concurrent is possible. Love Dr. Katrina, love that. Maybe there was some thinking that it wasn't possible, but now it's definitely doable, right? I love the word doable there. Maybe it's a recipe for disaster. Creative ways. Yeah, I love that. Not only creative ways, but ways that, teachers across the state are just masters at figuring this out and trying new things. Awesome. Continue to close out here. We'll add the closing survey one more time.